Hey everybody, what's good? What's up? Hope everybody's having a good Friday. Back with another live stream here where we're going to be going a little bit more in depth into different Linux Plus topics. I put out a little bit of questionnaire on Twitter as far as what folks might be interested in seeing, and going over the basics of users and groups seemed to get an awful lot of positive feedback. So I figured we'd go ahead and do that, walk through a few different labs, explain a little bit about the different configurations and how we go about doing that, and yeah, just kind of see how it all goes. So as always, as we're going through this, if you have any questions, please go ahead and drop those in the comments section, and we'll respond to those as we go through them. And yeah, anything else you want to chat about, go ahead and throw that in there too, and we'll see how it goes. So first thing that we're going to talk about is kind of users. And there's two different types of users that we're normally going to run into here within the Linux environment, and that is going to be system users. And I guess if you're kind of coming from a Windows background, something that, you know, I'm trying to think of how I would want to compare that. Maybe like service accounts or something along those lines. I mean, we're talking about accounts that aren't actually assigned to people, but actually run different processes on the box. And then we have our normal user accounts, which would be something that you or I would get and then would be able to log into the device. So the first thing that we're going to cover today is looking at something called etc password. And that's going to be kind of an inventory of all of the different users in your environment on your box. So if we go to that, and we're going to go cat, because remember that's the command we use when if we want to take a look at a file, etc password. And you see, remember that you can also hit the tab button as well to auto finish the commands that you're trying to put in there. So, and what this does is brings up a whole bunch of different users that are here on this box. A few different things that are important to mention here. I guess we'll talk about the layout and a few other things to kind of make it all flow a little bit. So each one of these lines represents a different account. Okay, and then within that, there's 7 separate fields that correspond to different things. So this first part here is a username. And you'll see that everything, each of these sections is separated by colons, right? So username is one field, and then there's an encrypted password. You don't need to really worry about that here. And then there's a user ID and a group ID. And these come into play a little bit later, especially when we're talking about permissions on different types of files and things like that. And we're not necessarily going to go into changing permissions on files or in directories. We kind of, I think we hit on that a little bit in the last video, but there's actually going to be a whole video where we're going to go into the configurations for all of that type of stuff. But when we do look at different files and directories at certain points through this lab, I will point that out to where that is important to notice. The next one after user, group, and then there's kind of like a comment section. So this is just commenting that it's the root account. And then the next one is the home directory for that account. And then it's the default shell that account uses when it logs in. And if we kind of see that these user IDs start at 0 and kind of go down to 13, 102. Kind of an important thing to remember, depending upon the flavor of Linux that you're using, is that those system users all start either under 500 or under 1,000. So in this case, we can kind of see, looking at all these are all 0 down to 115, 121, 125. these are all system users. And we see that the first non-system user that we have here, this JBC account, actually starts at 1,000. So kind of just something to keep in mind. And as I mentioned, this is my account that I have here on the box. If we were to kind of look at that the same way that we were looking at the other entries up above, then we know that JBC is a username, X signifies the encrypted password, user ID number 0 is 1,000, group ID is 1,000, JB is kind of the note thing that goes along with that. My home directory is going to be home/JBC, and then the shell that I get when I log in is the bash shell. Got some folks popping in here in the chat. Let me bring this up real quick. Hello, how's it going? Happy Friday. Let's see. Hey Kiki, what's good? Thanks for dropping in. And yeah, we could chmod 777 everything. What that means is that pretty much anybody has read, write, and execute access to everything on the box. So we are not going to be doing that. Let's see. So we talked a little bit about those users there. Something that's worth noting here is whenever you want to go to do something that's needs administrative credentials, right? You're going to be using that root account. There's a few different ways to do that. You could just use the sudo command, so it'd be like that, and then whatever you want to do, and then it will prompt you for the password to be able to do things as root. That's kind of done on like a per command basis. If you actually just want to switch completely into being root from, like in this case, JBC, then I would go sudo su for switch user. It's going to ask for the password. And you see when I do that, it changes this to root. We see that that is now the root account versus before when it was JBC. And then when I want to get out of that, I can just hit exit. Kind of some interesting things that I can do with that. If I want to see kind of like the ID numbers, I should be able to go ID. And that's going to give you my UID, my user ID, my group ID, and then the groups that it's in. So remember, these numbers here correspond to what we saw up above in the Etsy password file. If I exit out of this and go back to JVC and do the same thing, I go ID, right? Now we see that this here looks very much like this here. So my user ID is 1,000, my group ID is 1,000. This Etsy password file didn't cover the groups that I'm in. We're going to get to that a little bit later. But you can see the groups that JBC is under. And how I was able to actually sudo to become an admin is because of the fact that this account is in the sudo group. We're going to hit on some different flavors of Linux later on and how you actually go about getting an account to be able to have administrative privileges. Let's see, got some more folks dropping in. Throw these up. Fiesta Friday. Hey, I had tacos today, and they were delicious, and they used quesadillas as a taco shell. So that's a good Friday for me. Let's see. Shauna B. Happy Friday. Yep. All right, let's see. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Let's make that big again. Okay. So let's see what I want to move on to next there. I'm just looking at my notes. We already talked about system users and the differences between those IDs. So the other file that's really important is the shadow file. So this first one that we looked at, the password file, doesn't actually show our password or our hashes for the account. But if we go and we look at the shadow file, it won't let us see that first off, which is a good thing because it has the actual hashes, the hash values for our passwords. And if anybody was able to actually get access to that, you can take those hashes out and you can run certain types of hacking tools against that to be able to actually get the real password. And that's kind of one of the things when we go through different types of pen test labs, that's something, that's very common. You use a tool like, what is it? Is it John the Ripper? Jack the Ripper? One of those. Somebody's ripping passwords. I don't remember. That, and there's is it Hashcat? I think might be another one. But anyway, and just to show you what I meant with that, as far as the permissions on that, let's do an ls to take a look at the file. Here, I'll show you here in a second. We'll go ls-al, which is going to show the different permissions, etc shadow. And again, it won't let me do it. So we're going to go and sudo su. Now I'm actually as root. Now I should be able to go ls-al. Let's see. It might have been because I actually spelled that incorrectly. But we'll see that for the shadow file, root is the user and shadow is the group. And you'll see that the permissions here are read and write for root. And then this R here corresponds to read for the shadow group. You're probably very confused by that. So let me pop something up real quick that will kind of help explain that a little bit easier from a graphics perspective. Let's go pop up Safari. Okay, let me get that over here. So this is kind of what we're looking at. Whenever we do an ls, I like to do ls-al because it kind of gives me a little bit more information. And we kind of see here this output corresponding to whatever the particular file is, or directory, or whatever. And it's kind of broken down into these three different groups. I can't actually highlight that. And we see this first group here has a R, a W, and an X for read, write, and execute. This first grouping of stuff corresponds to the file owner. The second grouping of stuff corresponds to the group owner. And then this one corresponds to everybody else. So in this case with the shadow file, which we're trying to protect because of the fact that it has the hashes in it, when we were looking at that, it only had read and write access for root, and then read access for the shadow group. Anybody else, which as you saw when I was actually trying to get into it with my regular account without actually sudoing to root, couldn't get into it, couldn't see it, couldn't do anything with it. So kind of important things to understand, especially from the perspective of when we're trying to not only configure Linux systems, but also make sure that we're protecting the data that's on them correctly. So let's move back over to Ubuntu. Let's get back into this. Okay, let's see what else we wanted to do. Okay, so now we are root. So let's go cat etc shadow. And now we see all of those same accounts that we saw under the password file, right? But now we have a little bit of a different format going on here. And I'm going to explain to you exactly what all of this is. And it will be easier to just come down and take a look at this one, since this is the only non-system account that we have, which is actually my own account that's on here. So, again, yo, DJX, what's up? Hey, we're going through a Linux Plus lab on kind of the basics of users and groups. And so this isn't a pen test live stream. We did that on Wednesday. I'll do another pen test one on next Wednesday. But this is just kind of like basic Linux fundamentals and understanding and stuff like that. So I'm about to break down kind of like the different parts of the shadow file. Right, so we were looking at this, and again, we kind of get into using these colons as separators for all these different sections. So I'm going to pull up another document that's going to help explain what these different sections are, and then we can come back and look at my specific one, and we'll have a little bit of a better understanding when I actually walk through what all these different values mean. So let me pull that back up again. Go over here. So this is kind of like example of the same thing, right? And if we were to take this output and kind of break it up into the actual different sections or fields, again, using those colons to kind of break things up, we would have the username, then we would have the password hashing details and the password hash, which is this here. Well, it's actually a bit longer than that. They've truncated it. But the interesting thing with looking at the passing hash details and hash password is you actually can get some interesting information out of that when we're looking through here. So these first two characters here, that $ and 6, actually correspond to the particular type of hashing that's used on the system. In this case, $ and 6 corresponds to SHA-512. If it was $1, it would be MD5. And let's see. If it was $5, it would be SHA-256. So when we go back and we look at mine, you'll see it's $6, which means that it is using SHA-512, which I would assume is probably really what you want to be doing, and not using MD5, since MD5 can pretty much be cracked. Although, again, the length of your password and the complexity of it, not using dictionary words and stuff like that, is going to help strengthen that. The next part of the password or the hash when looking at that is the salt and separators. I don't think that really matters too much. Salting is when they add in some different characters uniquely, I believe, every time that a hash is done. Windows doesn't do that, so I think you can run into, what is it called? Hashing collisions, I think. But I could be wrong on that, and maybe they have fixed that. So that gets down to the third portion here. So first portion, second portion, third portion. And that is the last time that the password was changed. Okay, and then you get into some other fields dealing with days until required password is changed, expire date, and some other stuff. You'll see that here on mine, when we go back, let me bring that back up for you. Kind of the main things to take from this is this area here shows us that we're using SHA-512. This area up to here, I believe, is the salt portion of that. And then the rest of this, all the way up until that next colon, is going to be the hash itself. So if you can get access to this file and you're able to get that, then you're able to use those tools to be able to attempt to crack it. In some cases, depending upon the type of systems and the way that's configured, you could also, as Kiki mentioned, pass the hash, which means that you don't actually need to crack it. You can just actually provide it to the system that you're trying to gain access to. All right, let me think if there's anything else here that was really worth going over. Again, if we have any more questions, sometimes with these things you can, use the man command to dig into things to kind of see what's available. I think another thing at this point, or I think the next thing that we'd want to cover at this point, is actually how to create a user. And there's a few different things with that we can do that's kind of interesting, because we're also going to cover how you can create files that actually get assigned automatically to users whenever new users are generated, right? So there might be certain scripts or things like that that you might want to have there that run whenever new users are generated. So we're going to kind of go through some very, very simplified versions of that. Any questions up until this point? And while you think about that, I'm going to have a little bit of whiskey. So let us I'm going to do a shell command. I'm going to echo something into a file. Me echoing out this specifically, so I'm using a single quote around this whole command that I'm doing from the shell. The double quotes around here is going to be the actual text that I want put into the file. This little greater than sign is kind of like pointing to what the file that I want that text to be put into. So we're going to go into etc skel. And skel is going to be a directory where when you drop stuff in there, it is going to be added to any users being created moving forward. And hello.txt. And I have this one apostrophe back here, so I need to close this out like that. Okay. So if we actually go to cat etc skel hello.txt, that's there. Hit the tab button. We can see, yep. And so that file is now there. So what we're going to do now is create a new user, and we're going to see that this file is going to be put into their home directory automatically. So let's go useradd is a command we want to do. And we're going to go a switch with M. What this is going to do, the M with this command, make sure that you actually create a home directory for the user when you create the user. So that's important to do. And we'll make a account called Cyber. Okay. And so if we go to cd cyber, so now we're in the home cyber directory. If we do an ls, we see that text is there. So we now know that not only did we create a new account, a new user, we also had a way to automatically have some type of document added into their home file, their home directory when the account was created. And if we want to kind of go back and look at some of the other stuff before, we can do a cat etc password, and if we go all the way to the bottom here, we can now see that Cyber has a user ID of 1001 and the group ID of 1001. home/cyber is their home directory, and they're using this shell here compared to bash. Okay, but that might be, we might need to do some other stuff with that. So hold on a second, let's see if there's anything else I want to do there. I think that we can leave that there for the time being. Oh, we can also do a let me hold off on that for a second. So I'm going to move over to my notes for the next one, and we're going to look at groups at this point. So we kind of talked a little bit about users, how to create a user. We haven't done, if we want to do a password on this guy, let me show you how to do that real quick. And it should be cyber, and whatever we want the password to be, we'll just make it something easy. Okay. So now, if we were to go and look at cat etc shadow, you'll see that both my JBC account and my Cyber account have hashes in here for passwords. So, and if we go back, yep, okay. All right, so let's take a look at some groups. But first off, let's take a look at kind of the group equivalent of these types of files that we've been looking at. So if we go to cat etc group, this is kind of the equivalent of the password file, but for groups. So it's all the different groups that are configured on the device. And it also has its own unique way that things are broken down here. So again, they're using colons to kind of break all that stuff up. So the first field here deals with the group name. And then again, an encrypted password, so that doesn't really matter. Then the group ID. And then after that, a list of all of the users that are a member of that group. So if we see here, ADM has JBC in it, CD-ROM has JBC in it. Let's see what else we got going on. A whole bunch of other things. JBC has a group. Cyber has a group. I'm looking for... sudo. Okay, sudo's right here, right? So JBC's in sudo, so that means that JBC has admin privileges. Cyber is not in sudo, so Cyber cannot actually go ahead and access files that would require that. So for instance, let's see. Well, we'll hold off on that too. Cool thing that we can do, so I showed you the ID command before, right? It shows you the UID and the group ID and the groups. You can actually run the groups command. Let's do it with JBC groups, right? And then it shows you all of the different groups that you're in there. You can kind of get, the same information using the ID command, but maybe you don't want to see the rest of it. So we're going to create a new group. Very similar to kind of what we did with the useradd command. In this case, it's group add. Group add, and then we'll just call it YouTube. Okay. Oh. And why can't I do that? Because I am not sudoed. Let's go. Okay, let's try that again. There we go. So now if we take a look and cat etc group, we'll see that we now have a new group down at the bottom, YouTube, right? Now if I want to add a user to that group, we're going to go usermod and then lowercase a, uppercase G, and we can actually take a look at the man page here in a second, and I'll show you what those are specifically doing. But just to kind of tell you, I think that actually I'm not quite sure. It's assigning it to a particular group, but there might be a little bit more to it. So let me clarify through the man page what we're doing. Then it's the group that we're adding it to, YouTube, and then the user that we want to add to it. So in this case, let's go JBC. And so now, if we were to go back and look at the cat etc password, wait, no. Let's see. Or is it? Let's see. Let's see, groups. Yeah, didn't mean the S. YouTube, here we go, down at the bottom, and we see that JBC is now a member of the YouTube group. Now, if we wanted to change the group, like let's say, yeah, YouTube was cool, but we actually want to change the name to something else, then we can go group mod, and then the hyphen lowercase n, and the new name that we want it to be, let's call it Twitter. And the old group, right? And then if we go back and look at that file, we see that the name of the group has changed, kept the same group ID, and kept the same membership of the folks that were in it. So kind of cool that way. Let me see if there was anything else. We have a few different, commands with that. So you have group add, group delete, group mod, and then same thing with like user add, user delete. If we actually wanted to, let's take that cyber account and make it an admin, right? Because it wasn't in the sudo group. So if we wanted to do that, then we're going to use the usermod command. And we're going to go AG and let's see if I'm doing this right. We'll see if this works. If not, I might need another switch there. The user group that we want to go to, so sudo, and then the user was cyber. Okay. So now if we go back and look at, let's see, /group, we should have right there. So now cyber is added to the sudo group. It should have admin credentials, permissions, so it can sudo to root and do all of the stuff that the JBC account can do. So let's see. I think there was one other thing that I kind of wanted to cover here. Oh, real quick thing on the admin account since we're talking about it. And let me switch over to my my browser real quick. So we were talking about doing that from the perspective of being in Ubuntu, right? And that was kind of how we did it, was this one right here. A term that you might be familiar with if you've had any Linux experience before is the wheel group. And that is something that we would do kind of or used to do in a Red Hat or CentOS environment, is any account that was going to be able to have those root permissions would end up being added into a group called wheel. So just something to consider. For some reason, I think that they might have changed that or were doing away with that. I'm not 100% sure. And also the other thing to take into account whenever you're doing this stuff is what you're using for centralized authentication. So this works all great from the perspective of local accounts, and we're doing this in a lot of environments. You might have Active Directory or LDAP running on something else, and then you actually might be tying back certain privileges with certain groups to be able to do certain things. So just something to keep in mind as you kind of work through that in an operational environment. All right, so the last thing that I wanted to talk about, let me flip over to my notes on that, was user profiles. And these are kind of some things that you're going to want to be aware of, especially if you want to change kind of like some default configurations for when certain users log in. Individual user, or maybe you're going to make this change all the way across the board. So let me pull this back up. If you got any questions at this point, go ahead and throw those in the chat too. All right. So we're just going to cat a few of these and take a look and see what we got going on. The first one that we'll look at is cat etc profile. And this is kind of, I think, telling you which type of shell the profile is going to be using and pointing to some other config policies to be able to pull some stuff down. And also, I think this is setting, depending on the ID, maybe setting kind of the different types of prompts and stuff that you see, and some other profile stuff. The next one that you might have, let's see, etc. Sometimes there would be some stuff under skel for different bash profiles or bash login. And if those aren't there, then that's okay. Let's go etc. And we're looking for some bash. This one right here. bash.bashrc. So let's cat that. And if we scroll kind of up to the top of this, this is a system-wide bashrc file for interactive bash shells. And again, this is kind of a whole bunch of different types of configurations depending upon the what the output on the screen is going to look like. You can set some login banners and stuff like that if you want to do that. Maybe if you're going to mount different types of directories and stuff like that, you could probably do that type of stuff here. And I think that is pretty much the only two that I have here on the box from looking through those. But, if you wanted to implement, like a login warning banner, or you wanted to implement some type of information, you could edit this file. You could save it. Again, you do something kind of like, with the echo command and the quotes, type in what you want. The only thing is when you do that, then it's only going to apply to your profile. So if you actually do want it to apply to all profiles, remember you have to go make a copy of that file and put it into the skel directory that we were looking at before. The what was it? etc skel, I believe is what it is. So it would be like etc skel and then .bash .bashrc, I believe. So I think that is pretty much it for the things that I wanted to kind of hit on. It's important to know that these files are here as far as setting things up, either for individual accounts or for all accounts, as far as what their login type of stuff is going to be. But it's not really that big of a deal. I would say you don't need to memorize all of those. It's just more being aware that they're there. And if you wanted to, change something or implement something, this would probably be the files that you would need to mess with to do that. As far as with the users and the groups, that's stuff that's definitely really important, especially when you're talking about protecting the shadow file, when you're talking about permissions on different types of files and directories. Like I said, we're going to have another video that will go more in depth into that. How to create users, how to set passwords, how to create groups, modify groups, and then more importantly, the different commands that you can use to see what groups user account is in, the IDs associated with that, all that good stuff. So anybody have any questions at this point? If not, then we can go ahead and wrap it up. Got a good handful of folks on here that have stuck through to the end, so I appreciate that as always. Hope this was interesting and helpful. Like I said, I got a whole bunch more of these Linux labs to go through. I'll put out probably another poll or something to see what folks are kind of more interested in next. We could do stuff dealing with, I'm trying to think, maybe some CLI pipe redirection, how to edit data, move stuff around. Or we could go into like file directory, or like, well, we could do the files and directories and modifications and stuff like that for sure. There's a whole bunch of other services. There's some security stuff. There's some scripting stuff. I think I probably have roughly about 10 plus different labs that we can, or high-level topics that we can talk about. So plenty of good stuff from that perspective. And then don't forget, on next Wednesday, we're going to do another Pentest Plus Try Hack Me lab walkthrough. I think we're probably going to do Metasploit on Wednesday. So, oh, we got some stuff coming in. Thanks. Yep, you're welcome. Most definitely. Uh-oh, send in the sip and zoom. All right, I'll prepare myself. All right, so everybody else, take care. Hope you have a great weekend. And yeah, go get at it, and we will talk soon. All right, bye.